Mr. Sekou Cooke, welcome to the Institute of Black Imagination. I am so excited to hop into this conversation. You are, and your work is actually so pivotal to not only this organization, but just the way I understand design writ large. So I'm super excited to hop into this convo. Welcome.
Uh, Thank you, Dario. Glad to be here. It's nice and shiny inside this institute. It's thanks for welcoming me in.
Yeah, man, there's plenty good room, plenty good room. So to start, who would you like to dedicate today's conversation to?
Always to my mother. She's an inspirational force in my life. She's a lifelong educator, teacher, um, one of the most motivated, high energy people that I know. Taught me the meaning of multitasking and doing more work than time that you have. So yeah, for sure, my mother,
And what's her name?
Cynthia Cook.
Cynthia Cooke. All right, this one is for you, Cynthia. So to begin, what is hip hop architecture?
Yeah, that's like the question I get almost every day on a daily basis, which is funny because I keep trying to avoid the question in one way or another. I keep thinking that I'm probably going to get to a point where no one asks me the question anymore. I didn't know what it was, so I wrote an essay on it in 2014. Then people kept asking. Then I had a symposium with 12 people in 2015. Then people wanted to know what it looked like. So I put together an exhibition in 2018 and had that touring, which is still touring now. And then people still kept asking. So I wrote a whole book. I'm not quite sure what to do next. I think. I think it's something that's so hard to describe on one hand, but so super simple and elegantly described on another hand. Um, that hip hop culture in built form is what I want people to think about when they think about hip hop architecture. So that's the kind of 30-second elevator pitch version. But I don't want people to get lost in that simplicity. I want people to understand the complexity of it, that hip hop as a culture is a phenomenon that has outpaced anything anybody expected it to. 30, 40, 50 years ago, right? We're coming up on its official 50th anniversary in 2023. But it's a force that virtually anyone, any sentient being in the Western world is connected to, not just in the Western world, across the globe, right? And understanding our relationship with this phenomenon as a social, cultural, political movement should help us understand why it affects architecture and how it affects architecture, and that architecture really is intended to reflect the social consciousness, the social awarenesses of of our times, of any social or political or cultural movement. So hip hop architecture is really trying to understand or put a nice little box around as many of those things that are trying to align with hip hop culture, but shape built environments at the same time. And simultaneously, it's avoiding that box. It's realizing that that little box doesn't want to be nice and comfortable. That hip hop is something that has constantly defied definition, and it's constantly re-editing itself and redefining itself. So of course, hip hop architecture is something that's going to keep redefining itself as well.
Yeah, I asked the question because I know that's the question most people just ask, right? What is this thing, you're talking about? And we're going to unpack that because I think the question, or maybe a more accurate question, is like maybe what is the relationality between hip hop and architecture, or in which ways can the techniques or even the construction of hip hop influence architecture, or even how can architecture provide frames through which we can understand hip hop. And
Exactly.
In speaking with you, and also just being a witness to your work and your presentations, it really blew me away because you just said that. And first of all, I would also like to let people know that I am not a hip hop aficionado. I barely know what I'm talking about. I actually learned more about hip hop from researching for this interview than I knew prior to.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, Sekou. But what I found really fascinating was the ways in which the refusal that Black and brown individuals had, particularly in inner cities, around design, around the systems that they found themselves in. And when I spoke earlier about the ways in which your work influenced my work, was really that frame of understanding that these tenets of hip hop, remixing, and scratching, and others that we'll talk about later, actually help us better understand what it means to subvert and almost refuse the systems that we find ourselves in, or at least refuse the design functions that we find ourselves in, right? Like, so for instance,
for sure.
You speak so eloquently about what does it mean to do the thing you're not supposed to do to a record, which number one is touch it, right? And then not only touch it, but this thing that is designed to go forward in a very kind of particular way, you actually then go backwards, right? You actually scratch it. And in that process, in that refusal, in that subversion of design, as predicted, is actually a point of invention.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is where we start to make tangible these things that seem so intangible at first. People almost automatically start from a place of thinking that hip hop and architecture are two very disparate fields and two very disparate terms, and we're just kind of mashing up and putting two things together that don't seem to fit. But if we really start to understand the nature of urban environments, the ways that people navigate a city, the ways that contemporary design philosophy has changed over the last 10, 15, 20 years, we realize that hip hop is essential in that conversation. I once said that you can't really have a full conversation about urbanism without talking about hip hop. You can't really talk about a full conversation about hip hop without talking about urbanism and urban design, right? Because they're both influencing each other continually, consistently. And so, yeah, you're right. There are ways that we're extracting processes and tenets and ideologies from hip hop and trying to bring them into the design world. So like layering and scratching and sampling and these different methods that you talk about. It also includes things like digging through the crates, like what a DJ does, which is really unearthing and unmasking all of these lost histories, these musical histories that are a part of our cultural reality that we may have forgotten about or didn't understand, but then you bring it into a contemporary framework, and then now we have a new appreciation of it, right? And that's a process that is so critical to any contemporary architect or anybody who's working in a historically significant part of a city or significant part of the world, on a building scale or on a city scale, right? So I am always looking for these different ways that are completely in line with the way that hip hop has framed itself, that are directly applicable to how we address design. And like you talk about with the record, it's also about using technology in ways that it wasn't supposed to be used, right? So what is our general approach to technology? We sit back and we consume. Hip hop says no, we have to actually disrupt that piece of technology and use it, allow it to become something that is an innovative piece of musical instrument, or a shaper of a space, or an intersection, an interdisruptor force within some kind of environment.
Yeah, it makes me think about, kind of like, when you said, make, kind of, subvert design or use technology in a way in which it was not designed. My first thought was actually about phone payments and how that was actually, like Apple Pay or something like that, which was actually happening on the African continent,
Yes.
right? You actually had Africans using their cell phones, flip phones, right, to kind of have this barter payment system for years before it made it to the iPhone. And so, thinking about this, and for me, that is the Black imagination. That is the catalyst, right, for innovation. But it's really about that hack. It's really about the hack of it, which is really kind of a bellwether or a signifier of something future to come. And also thinking about just the ways in which hip hop is also an archival kind of process as well. Like it is reconstituting, right? It is reconstituting a body of work that, perhaps may have been lost, right? Like there's so many records, like my grandmother has actually been sampled. Like the East St. Louis Gospelettes has been sampled. Fat Joe, like it's kind of a cult thing. But for you personally, I mean, kind of circling back to like origins, coming from Jamaica, like when was your love of hip hop birthed, and like what did hip hop give you access to?
Yeah, the fascinating thing about hip hop is that it has this really powerful connection and to Jamaica as a place, not just Jamaican music, but to the people as well. Kool Herc was Jamaican. He actually threw his first party a year or two after coming back from Jamaica and seeing the dance halls and seeing these massive stereo systems in the big open yard and people just dancing outside. And this is his first experience with toasting, where the DJs were the ones who were not just changing the records, but they would shout people out in the crowd and talk over the records and kind of say things. And so in Jamaica, our MCs, we call them DJs, so the dancehall DJs, they're not the ones spinning the records, they're the ones who are talking over the tracks. And we can see even contemporary pop music, hip hop, and all other kinds of pop music there's a deep influence of Jamaican music that's in there constantly. I remember listening to the top 40 like maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I was like 50% of these songs are have some kind of Jamaican music embedded within it. This is when like Drake had One Dance out, which is a dance hall track, and what's his name? Justin Bieber had this song Sorry, and I was like, why do I like Justin Bieber? Why do I like this song? Like, oh, it's a dance hall song. Of course, that's why I like it. The musical influences that I grew up with are not anywhere different from the musical influences at the root of hip hop. Um, Reggae and dancehall are part of my DNA growing up. And hip hop is something that we understood from afar and knew. And just like most Jamaicans, I have American cousins, and we would come up and visit New York in the summertime. And you know, my cousins in Brooklyn and the Bronx, and in New Jersey. And I remember I have clear memories of jumping on a bed, either in the Bronx or in Brooklyn to Curtis Blow's "These Are the Breaks." That would have been the summer of '81, and that was like the hot song that summer. And so that was my earliest introduction to it. But it wasn't until I came back for college in the mid 90s that I really got my full introduction to hip hop music, and that's the era that most people refer to as the golden age of hip hop. You know, with Biggie and Nas and Tupac and all those guys who were expanding, like Bad Boy Records and Death Row Records, and Snoop and Dr. Dre on the West Coast, kind of making their name for themselves. Most of my cultural references around hip hop are still embedded within that era. I still stay minorly contemporary, but it's it's still not my heart and soul. It's still just something that I understand and enjoy from an observer point of view, right?
And but like, you know, being a young man from Jamaica, landing back in the States, um, in this golden era of hip hop, like did it like what was it like listening to these stories, right? Like you're coming from Jamaica, which is, you know, a majority black country, right? With its own, you know, histories, obviously, but then encountering this very, you know, black American, and then also this very black American like sound, right? With these different, very urban stories, like as a source of identity, even like what was that reconciliation as you entered into the States?
Well, it's what I was most aware of, especially when it comes to identity, was that my individuality was not enough. It was there was a kind of collective identity that this country kind of assimilates you into. You know, no one cares whether you're African or from the Caribbean or from South America. They just care if you're black, right? When you come to this country, you're just black. It doesn't matter. You could speak Spanish or Portuguese or French, and they're like, "Oh, you're just another black dude, right? Nobody cares, right?" My our natural affiliation, our natural place to gravitate towards is with the African American and within that community. And so that's where you start to internally have these dialogues about the relationship between Jamaicanness, people from the island, people in the diaspora of Jamaicanness, people who are Jamaican from Brooklyn or from Queens, and their parents are Jamaican, but they grew up within the culture, but they're still African American. And then those who can trace their history back to the slaves on this continent, right? It's a different kind of internal conversation that happens when you arrive here in this country than the conversation that happens outwardly in the rest of the country, the rest of the world. Then you're just having the same black-white conversation, right? So you find where your affiliation groups are, you find who you share common histories with. And then there's an identity that you are given or is assigned to you versus the identity that you bring for yourself. So anyone entering college in an American context is going to have similar identity issues or similar ways of finding themselves, quote unquote. Even Black Americans who grew up in middle-class communities or suburban communities confronting kids that went to public school and may have gotten into Ivy League university on a different kind of scholarship level than they have, but then the outside world just sees them all as Black. So everyone, I think, at the first wave of college has this moment of confronting their Blackness, and I did too.
I love this. I love this conversation, especially when you speak about, coming to the U.S. and having this identity put upon you, which you, I guess, quickly had to get up to speed with and understand what the hell, people are talking about. But there's this interview that you gave in Metropolis where you said, if you can label something, then you can appropriate it.
And then you can own it.
Double tap on that.
Yeah. That's one of the oldest tricks in the book. That's one of their oldest games. Is like, let's name it. Let's give things a name. Let's put a flag on it. The more things that we can put flags on and crests on and our names on and our titles on, these are the ways that we can own them. If you look at the difference between like how Native American and indigenous peoples here or across different continents name or give name to different things or places, they'll call it like moves really fast or rising sun or narrow way. And then Europeans name things after somebody's last name. Like, this is from John the Conqueror. This is Washington. This is Lincoln. This is, and it's part of that ownership mentality is also part of wanting to control the land, but it's really essentially a way of fighting the fear of death. It's about trying to maintain immortality somehow. It's trying to maintain life beyond your own mortality. There's a saying about you live as long as people remember you, right? And as soon as no one else is left on the planet to remember who you are or remember your name, then that's when you truly die. So this is part of that whole exercise. This is that whole mentality that it's not ours. It's not part of who we are. I think we have to confront it wherever we see it show up.
And when you say ours, you mean as Black people? As Black people
in America, Black people across the diaspora. It's not part of who we are. It's not our natural way of being, like putting things in a box, defining things in a very strict way, putting our name on things, putting our flags on things. yes, we were kings and emperors and queens and conquerors, and we had value, we had possessions and lands, and we owned slaves at different ways. But it's the kind of subjugation of humanity is not part of our natural system. We lived in alignment with nature and with the earth, and not in trying to control it and subjugate it.
Yeah, I mean, I love, I love linguistics. I love words. Because the thing with words is that they actually obfuscate the essence of the thing, right? Like, I think people forget that the words are just symbols. They're actually stand-ins. They are almost like a membrane between the sign, right? They are the sign versus the thing signified. And if we get stuck at word level, then we never get into like the essence, right? We actually lose the essence of the thing that's being named, which, and even in my studying of like other languages, learning how much the English language itself is designed, right? And I think of language as design, is designed for control. It is designed for the naming. It is designed for categorization. Rarely is it, it's not really great for expressing like nuance of the human experience. But kind of bringing it back to hip hop, there's, in your book, you mentioned, in speaking about the misogyny that exists in hip hop, you list a lot of scholars, who've done that work, and you say that I'm sure they have as much trouble defending their male subjects, right, in hip hop as you do having in defending Kanye West, which we don't have to double tap on. But in this conversation of labels, there is someone who kind of bridges this gap between architecture and hip hop, which is Virgil. And he recently just opened a show. Well, a show was opened about him at the Brooklyn Museum, kind of spanning his oeuvre of work in his 41 years. But there was something that I think was never really explored fully, was his use of labels and the ways in which it was almost his medium, like his artistic medium to play with. But in that kind of bridging that Virgil was doing, like, what role do you feel, he plays, right, in our cultural understanding of a quote unquote hip hop architecture?
Yeah, I mean, he was definitely a master of semiotics, right? Like the sign and the signified, and he was always playing with that, about how something is named or whether it is named, and whether we understood his intentions behind what he was doing with logo and shoelace and things like that. We still have to acknowledge that it brought up different ideas and thoughts and philosophies for us about why something needs a logo, why something needs to be called something, why something needs to be named something, and what our awareness of it, how our awareness of its labeling shifts our perception of it. So he definitely understood the use of the word in many ways. I think he had a whole lot of a whole lot to add to the conversation around hip hop architecture. And he was actually, he's actually the interview that I was sad to not get for that book while I was writing it. I sent him a copy of the book after it was published, but I in asking for the original interview request, he turned me down. He was a bit busy running Louis Vuitton and a fashion line and opening stores and changing the world. I think he's somebody who's definitely invested in the hip hop project as a DJ, as a protege of Kanye, as someone steeped into the fashion industry and defining hip hop within that space. And he's someone that we all know in the design field that he studied architecture and was influential in the forming of different spaces, his own stores, and so forth. He's somebody who's embedded within that conversation that I really wanted to get a sense from him, how he thought about himself fitting within that context. But I think I use him quite a lot as an example when people are asking for practitioners or people who fit within that space. They're usually looking for people who build buildings, but I like to talk about him as a practitioner. I like to talk about Theaster Gates, Lauren Halsey, Olalekan Jafis, all of whom have built spaces and environments that people can inhabit, but have never practiced anything that is could be called architecture, right? But it just changes your perspective on what architecture actually means and who are the practitioners of architecture and how they relate again to hip hop culture and how hip hop culture can actually shift and change the design discipline of architecture.
Yeah, I'm bringing it like all the way back even to this conversation between architecture and hip hop. You mentioned in your book, which I found hilarious, that you said that you kind of had an early misidentification in saying that Robert Moses was the father of hip hop, the actual father of hip hop. And for listeners who do not know who Robert Moses was was the head of the New York Parks Department, but was really Machiavellian in the way in which he wielded power, so that he really single-handedly shaped the urban landscape of New York, putting highways, in the middle of Black neighborhoods and completely, disrupting them, particularly in the Bronx with the BQE. He also, changed the parkways, the bridges on parkways in the New York area so that like actually access to the beaches, he made the overpasses lower than was the state regulation so that public buses actually could not make it under them, which actually prevented the public from making it to beaches. So you actually had to have a car to get to the beaches. So if you want to know more about Robert Moses, you can Google him. But
he also once had the Triborough Bridge was also once his own bank account for several years. He built the Triborough Bridge. No one else had access to those accounts. Everybody who was paying tolls the first several years of the Triborough Bridge were going into an account that only he had access to. This guy was fascinating, and at some point didn't have any official title in the city. He just had this power. It's amazing. But go ahead.
No. But in saying that, what was that first like? Why was that a first mistake? Why did you even think that Robert Moses, right, this guy, is actually the real father of hip hop?
Yeah, it started with some earlier conversations about connecting, architecture as a symbol, the buildings that people grew up in, the buildings that were a part of the landscape of the South Bronx at the time, or even the towers that are where 1520 Cedric Avenue is, that these are a derivation of the Plan Voisin, these towers in the park that were designed by Le Corbusier, as a provocation for how to transform the city of Paris and to clear the slums there, and this is how people should live in the future. And that, like Corbusier never really instituted that, got away with that in Paris, but Robert Moses got away with a lot of those in Manhattan and the Bronx and so forth. So it was kind of this interesting provocation that architecture could be at the moment of birth of hip hop culture, and that was this hook that was important. But as I say in the book, it's like the biggest problem with that is giving all of this agency and power again to these white men and ignoring the agency and the pioneering spirit of the true hip hop architects, the true architects of hip hop, who are, Flash, Kool Herc, Bambaataa. These are high school kids, right? These are kids. I mean, Bam might have been out of high school. I mean, like, not graduated from high school, but not in high school, but high school age kids, right? And it was a way for them to have fun and keep off the streets and stay out of gangs. And because gang culture was very, very real in the South Bronx at that time. We have to give credit where credit's due and decentralize the white male figure, which is always the center of all these conversations, and re-empower these black and brown kids who are amazingly innovative and futuristic pioneers, right?
Yeah, I love it because I got what you meant, right? Like that these designers, these architects, created these kind of conditions in which, right, these moments could happen, which in a way, if you think about it, is actually the first point of refusal, actually.
Exactly.
Like, that's actually the first design before a hand ever touched a record. It was actually even the subversion of space and space making that was almost like the catalyst for hip hop. And for listeners in thinking about places that exist, right, based off of these ideas of both Robert Moses and Le Corbusier, his Ville radieuse, something like a StuyTown, right? Stuyvesant Town in New York
for
City.
Sure. Classic example.
Which is so much a part of the history of racism in architecture and the built environment, especially knowing that there was a black female architect who worked on the project, Beverly Lorraine Green, who was, I think she was the first licensed African-American woman architect in America in Illinois in like 1942. So that there was actually a black woman who actually worked on the StuyTown project and actually couldn't even live there, which is kind of wild to think about. But also, like, kind of with this kind of like addressing this racist history in architecture, like, how can this also be a space in which black individuals can find like healing and understanding?
Yeah, I think that,
like, how do we reclaim these spaces?
Yeah, I think it starts with that joy, right? That, again, it was kids trying to find outlets and places to thrive within a literally apocalyptic landscape, right? You see some of the pictures of the South Bronx in the late 60s and early 70s, and they're almost indistinguishable from images of Hiroshima after the bomb, right? These are spaces where people were literally looking to have fun, and it's one of the highest exemplar of Black joy that you can find, and that there is not just joy but liberation in these spaces that people create. That it's once someone finds something that that comes from their own hands or their own ingenuity or their own visualization, and it can become real, and other people can respond to it and react to it and enjoy it and see themselves in it. If someone can see themselves in your work, then it just changes the whole calculus of everything, right? It's very, very different than the ideology of having a really high standard that people have to meet and that people are aspiring to create. And then it's like, oh, that's architecture. That's what they mean. But then people feel restricted and sterile and feel not themselves in those spaces, and they have no real emotional connection to those things. So the joy, especially Black joy, is deeply integrated and embedded within the entire project of hip hop. It's been there. It's been there from the beginning. It's been there from the beginning. Yeah, like I get a little annoyed sometimes when people suggest every single hip hop thing that comes across their way to them. But there's this Netflix series a few years back called The Get Down, and what was great about that series, it got a little soap opera-y, but it was just showing. It really highlighted how these were all kids, right? And how oppressive the environment was, and they were just trying to be kids, and they were just trying to find a space to have fun. And and there's a few moments early on in the series where you're going through all of these derelict, depressive environments, and then you go around the corner, and all of a sudden there's a party. And something is happening here, and you get this sensation like, oh wow, what is this, and how can we be down with that? And I don't know what's happening here, but this is great. So the spirit of that is really, really fantastic to me, and something that I always want to bring into all the projects that I do.
Speaking of projects that you do, why architecture? Like, why are you even an architect? Like, what is it?
I don't know.
What is it about the profession?
No idea. I should probably be a carpenter or something. No, I believe it or not, I wanted to be an architect since I was 5 years old. One of those crazy beings who decided that at that early age. I was the way I tell it. I always loved to draw. It was a great way for me to just like spend my time and digest the world through putting things on paper. And I was good at drawing, and I liked the sense of drawing and kids coming around to see what I was drawing, and it's almost like a spectator sport sometimes. And it's also the kid who would like take my toys apart to see how they worked and how they fit together, to see all the little clicking mechanisms, which always frustrates parents, right? My poor mother. So I remember having a conversation with my grandmother about loving to draw, and she was like, "Oh yeah, there's these guys who draw buildings, and they're the ones who are responsible for all the buildings that we see around. They're called architects." Like, oh, that sounds kind of cool. I think I want to be an architect. And I decided that at 5. And I told everybody, because at 5 years old, everybody's asking you, what are you gonna be when you grow up, which is probably one of the worst fucking questions you can ask a 5-year-old child. Like, don't ask them what they want to be. Ask them what they like to do. Ask them what they have fun, where they find their fun. Ask them what the name of their toys are. Ask them which planet they like to visit. Don't ask them what they want to do for a living. You're trying to put these people into these categories of jobs before they're even like in high school. It's sad. Um, but anyway, I kind of decided that that's what I wanted to do. How I would answer that question, and I really still had no idea what it really was. And then I was very, very lucky to have an older sister who decided at a reasonable age that she wanted to be an architect. She's 5 years older than I am, and she didn't decide till maybe her last year of high school that she wanted to do architecture, which makes a lot of sense. And so she kind of paved the way for me. She got into architecture school. She emigrated to the U.S. and started off at City College, and then transferred to Cornell after a couple of years. And then and then she basically told me that Cornell is where I needed to be if I wanted to be an architect. And she literally filled out the application for me and got my parents to give the $60 application fee. And or maybe I can't even remember. Maybe my sister even put up the $60 application fee. I can't remember that. But she helped me put my portfolio together. Like literally took pictures of all my artwork and bought the materials and helped me put it all together and submit it in time. Talked on the back end to the administrators who are reviewing all this stuff to make sure that my stuff was getting processed. The only part I did was just write the essay, right? And so she single-handedly got me into Cornell. And
wow.
Yeah, at that point, I still didn't know what architecture was, right? And I sometimes say that I graduated from architecture school and still didn't know what architecture was. It's in the profession that I started really understanding what this thing really is and what we actually do. And I'm still kind of figuring it out as I go right now, 20 years down the line.
What did you learn once you got into the field of what you actually do? What do people think architects are, and then what do they actually do?
I think people think architects are what George Costanza think architects are. Some things like a really fun, cool thing to say at parties that you are, and people respect you and say, "Oh, that sounds like a cool thing." Sometimes people think that architects just draw houses, and you come to an architect and they give you a drawing, and then you're done, and then you pay for that drawing, and inside architects have developed a reputation for being elitist, arrogant, egotistical, which we are in many cases, for sure. It's part of our training to be that way, but but it's hard to describe what we truly do without sounding like we have a God complex, because architects are really interpreters and shapers of the built environment. And we do some of the most magical things where we're taking ideas and turning them into physical reality, right? Like turning ideas into habitable space is pure magic. Like it's an idea. It's not even tangible. It's completely ephemeral. But you're translating that. You're listening to that. But for anybody who knows anything about architecture, I usually say that our primary responsibility is not to the client. It's not to the budget, for sure. It's not to the codes or the rules or the governmental agencies that we have to work with. Our responsibility is definitely not to our own artistic will, and not even our responsibility is not even to the end users, which is what all this health, safety, and wellness code stuff is about. Our responsibility is primarily to the project. And when you think about it that way, then you have to understand the project as a kind of living, breathing thing that is attempting to come to life. And we're here to guide it into life. We're here to interpret what the project wants to be and understand it in as deep a way as we can, and translate that into images and drawings and notes and ideas that other people can understand in order to bring it into this world. And that's the most kind of philosophical, fantastical that I get when I describe what architects do. But you know, going down this road with this work that I'm doing around hip hop and architecture, a lot of it's shifting and changing, and not changing as much as evolving, right? It's evolving into a place where I'm acknowledging that other people have to be part of the process as well, and that no single person can be responsible for a project from beginning to end. It has to be a collaboration of several people. And the more you get communities involved in public spaces or spaces that affect their lives, the more agency you give to those people, and the more empowered they feel, the more connected they feel to the work that's being produced. And that takes a huge diminution of ego. You know, you have to put your ego way in the back seat to allow someone else who hasn't gone through the training that you have to actually drive the bus for a little bit and help shape exactly what the project is going to look like. You have to let go of your preconceptions of exactly what it's supposed to be and allow it to be something that you didn't expect.
Amazing. I'm so glad that you kept talking, because you did slip into the celestial plane there for a second. But you know, I can only imagine, you know, walking into this field, wanting to be, you know, an architect since you were 5, and then getting into it and going through this very classical kind of architecture training, and understanding that those who have manifested, you know, the world that we exist in, have been doing it through the lens of their own kind of reduced and specific way of seeing the world, one that maybe didn't map onto your own, you know, lived experience.
Exactly.
And I'm sure at times, like, you know, that also created moments of friction, if we want to be diplomatic about it, within yourself. And like, so how did you still manage to create or maybe even use that when you came across like difficulties and challenges and people who wanted to challenge you?
It's I get versions of this question sometimes, usually from students who don't understand how I get to be at a place where I'm this brash sometimes, or this self-certain, or can conduct myself in a way where I kind of don't give a fuck a lot of times. And it comes from having gone through adversity, right? Like, adversity teaches you quite a lot. You know, it comes from a place of almost losing my career, my teaching career, right? Or my teaching career being threatened in the middle of my time at Syracuse, and I realized that I started out trying to do things one way, which was the way that I thought it should be done. And then I was told, no, that way is no good. Do it our way. And then I shaped my career around doing the things the way that they wanted it to be done. And then they're like, no, you're not good enough to do these things that way. And then I'm like, fuck it. Why would I do something your way when you don't accept it the same way you didn't accept it when I would try to do it my way? So after that, I was just like, I'm just going to do whatever I want to do. And I'm going to do it in the way that I think it's best going to serve the thing that needs to be done. And that kind of attitude changed everything and just allowed me to just get into the spaces that I really wanted to get to and do the work that I really wanted to do and do it in the way that I wanted to do it, you know? And in that, just being really observant and aware and conscious of the surroundings at all times. And if you're observant and aware and conscious, then you can actually start to document the things that you see and the things that you observe, and share that perspective with as many people as you can. And sometimes people listen, and sometimes people think that the things that you say aren't so crazy, and then people start to support your work. And that's the only explanation I have.
Yeah, I am one of those recipients on the other end of your, one of your, adversity, um, one of those moments of adversity. But like in that, like, who did you have to become? Like, what did you learn about yourself?
I had to become somebody who worked a lot, worked really hard. But it wasn't just, a lot of times you hear people talk about, oh, you got to work really hard, you got to work a lot, work long hours. And, but for me, it's all a joy. You really, really just have to be in love with what you do. And it's not like you do a whole lot of stuff and then figure out a way of falling in love with the things that you do. You feel the feeling of love first, and then you follow that feeling wherever it takes you. And if you're doing something and you keep feeling that feeling of love, then that becomes passion, then it becomes motivation, then it keeps going and going and going. And then you don't feel like you're working at all. You just and hearing that feeling of love, or being aware and attuned to that feeling of love, means that you have to tune everything else out. I'm sure you've heard that a lot of times, that people have to just like quiet all the noise around them and focus in a specific direction. And that's what happens, when a lot of people around you say negative things or say a lot of shit that hurts you inside. You can either listen to it and wallow in it and allow it to pull you down, or you wake up and you realize that shit's about them and it's not about me, and I don't really care to listen to it. I'm just gonna do the thing that I want to do, because this is where my joy is. This is where love is. This is where my passion is, and that's what's leading to my happiness and my peace. So it's, yeah. I don't know any other way of putting it.
Yeah, what does love feel like?
I mean, if if we have to explain the feeling of love to a human being, then they're not really human. Love love is not something that we explain to each other. Love is something that we just embody and we share, right? And when it's, you know, when people talk about romantic love, they say the thing in the same way all the time. Um, they say, you'll know it when you get there. You'll just know. You'll just know. Yeah, but we can put romantic love in a little box and put it aside. But with love in general, it's, you have to know, because it's truly our natural state of being. It's what we are. We are beings of love. It's like I'll tell you what it's like. It's like a tuning fork, right? If you hit a tuning fork of a certain note, the same tuning fork of that note will vibrate without being hit, right? So if I hit a C note, if I hit a C on tuning fork, and I have a whole range of notes going there, in a whole packet of tuning forks, only the C will vibrate out of all of the different notes that I have. So if I am love and somebody hits the love tuning fork, I'm going to vibrate. I'm going to feel it.
So love is like resonance.
Yeah, love is resonance. It's vibration.
Resonance, alignment.
Absolutely.
Gravity, almost. There's a link. There's a draw. I mean, we're having this conversation. I'm not sure when we'll publish it, but I would say just keep an eye on your DMs afterwards.
Sounds good.
But like as we like kind of navigate this landscape of creativity, of design, of hip hop, of post-colonialism. Like, what advice would you give to someone who also is young, right? Who thinks about architecture and design, but doesn't, fully understand it? Like, where should they even start?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of places to go to get advice about starting a career in architecture or wanting to immerse oneself in design. A lot of places that will give bad advice and that will lead people into years and years of struggle and strife and depression. Most of those places are highly institutionalized places. Things that are, if something has been around for decades or almost a century and has had the same mission or a similar mission for many or most of those decades, and isn't anywhere closer to achieving any of those missions, then they're probably not an institution that you want to align yourself with or put a whole lot of hope into getting the kind of results that you want out of them. That they're finally gonna solve the issue of low representation of Blackness in architecture. Finally, they're gonna solve it soon. I'm gonna hold out, and it's gonna come within the next few years. That's those are places that I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time. I would find people who speak a language that speaks to you. Somebody who is doing something that you want to be doing, someone who has come from a place that's similar to where you've come from and speaks a language that you understand. And yeah, and someone who when they you know hit their tuning fork, you start to vibrate.
It's actually, as you even speak about it, it actually takes me back to hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, hip hop almost as pedagogy,
Yeah.
because you speak in your book. There are these kind of core tenets of hip hop, like that it's palimpsest meaning layered, right? Like there are things
Mm-hmm.
that come before and things get stacked on top of it. Hip hop is anthropomorphic, it's performative, and adaptive.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's almost the way one approaches, I think, any kind of like profession or desire, right? It's this kind of step
Mm-hmm.
of one understanding kind of what came before,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, what is the world that you are inhabiting, right? Like,
Yeah.
what are we walking into?
Yeah.
Which hip hop does almost as you say in the book, like bricolage, actually, right? That
Mm-hmm.
hip hop does it in this kind of bricolage way, and then this anthropomorphism, right? That understanding that, like you said, if there's an institution that has a mission that it has not lived up to, right? Like that means that this thing is not even alive,
Yeah.
right? So this kind of anthropomorphism, understanding that this is something that is wanting to exist. It has its own essence.
Yeah.
And then this idea of performativity, right? Like that there is also a presentation,
Mm-hmm.
that there is something that is in dialogue almost, right? Like that it is communicative, that we are
Mm-hmm.
in community, and then it's also adaptive, right? So that it is also something that can change or evolve over time. So
Mm-hmm.
that's, I mean, kind of it. I mean, hip hop is a pedagogical process as well
Yeah.
into entering, I think, anything.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of, you spoke about institutions and education, and in our own kind of private conversations, I know education and how one even structures it is something that you're heavily interested in and like
Yeah.
invested in and kind of shaping. Could you speak about that and like this process that you're quite interested in and kind of reshaping education?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a real long project. It's a long goal kind of project. It's and I think it's just something that's been programmed into me from as a kid. Before I was even wanting to be an architect at 5 years old, I was teaching. I was always teaching kids around me, teaching kids in my age group or younger than me. And I've kind of naturally been teaching most of my life. And I think definitely comes from my mother, who's a lifelong teacher. My father has taught. My sister teaches. Many people in my mother's family teach, and have PhDs and things like that. There's a big history of academics in my family. So I think I naturally gravitated towards academia after college, even though I resisted it for many years. And because I just wanted to practice, I just wanted to be a
Mm.
practitioner, learn how to be an architect, learn how to draw, learn how to build, learn how to deal with clients and contractors, and learn how to detail. Like detailing is such an art form that so few people that I have ever come across know how to do really well. But I also fell in love with teaching pretty early on in my in academia, in my academic career, because there was just this sense that my own interpretations of these ideas that I get from other people beforehand can now be translated and consumed by others, and then it takes on a new shape. And there's this recognition that you're carrying on this tradition that is hundreds of thousands of years old, since the beginning of humanity. Like, we're always like, this is how we create knowledge. This is how we transfer knowledge. We're always, somebody's teaching somebody else, or in, if in like the Star Wars tradition is like the Jedi and the apprentice, and they're like teaching each other. There's always a master and an apprentice, and there's always some kind of following. So I've been fascinated by that, and I think the lure of teaching pulled me into academia, which is a space that has evolved for me into a means to an end, because of my general love of institutions that you may have sensed before. Yeah, like I really am not a fan of institutions, or especially the institution of academia, of higher education, or supposedly higher education. I don't think it is what it was meant to be. I think it's fallen short in many aspects. I'm happy that I invested myself to the place where I was able to understand and learn about research. I didn't really understand research fully until after immersing myself into academia, and after going back to grad school later on in life, and then starting my writing practice. Like, writing as a practice is something that I didn't think I would ever fully invest myself into, but I'm happy I have. And so that's allowed me to get to this next phase, which is where I'm imagining a way of educating designers and architects that isn't anything that is standard within the world of academia right now. And my current place of my current starting point is within the urban design program here at UNC Charlotte. So it's not the this is the one of very few places that I would have come in order to do this. I really, when I was done with Syracuse, I was kind of done with academia as well. But here I had an opportunity to take a really small program that has the potential to be incredibly impactful, because this tiny program within a state university in a city that is incredibly bustling and rapidly growing and defining itself and shaping itself. So the relationship between this program and the city is incredibly powerful, and can completely have deep lasting impacts within the city, and also change, the way that we deal with certain elements of education. So I've just started this. This is the end of my first year here. I'm just finishing off with the summer, the last of 3 studios for the 1 year MUD students. This summer has been the first time that I've been really reshaping or retooling a part of the program. And then that's going into the fall, where it's slowly being shifted into a version of this ideal scene that I have. And the ideal scene is something that's a little bit further off, but we are taking the first steps towards that, into doing something within an academic structure that can be really limiting, and doesn't always have a whole lot of flexibility. We're trying to do something, just push the edges one little bit first, and then another little bit. It's like tightening the wheel a little bit, then a little bit more, then a little bit more. So we'll see what
Yeah,
happens.
what is that educational thesis, right? That, there is, we I think we understand this kind of like kind of like progressive model of kind
Mhm,
of passing something. Somebody gives you a grade, they move you
mhm,
on, whether or not you
mhm,
actually learned the information or not, you learned
mhm.
what they thought you wanted to know, right? So that's a
Yeah.
traditional education model that we understand. But like in approaching this, like what's your thesis? What's your
Yeah. Well, there are certain pieces that, yeah, I can lay it all out for you, and much of it, some of it could get me fired, if I go too deep into it. But these are things that I talked about at the beginning of, even in my interview process. But um, yeah, like I don't believe in grades. I don't believe in social promotion. Um, I think that each person should be learning very specific skills that are fundamental, and should not move on to the next skill until they've mastered the first skill, right? So, and there are certain things that go beyond history or culture or race or ethnicity, are just fundamental to anyone. So anyone who's in a design field needs to know how to draw. That, and it's absurd to me that that's even a point that is debatable right now, because there are generations of design students who don't know how to draw. Um, and it's just a fundamental connection between the imagination, the ephemeral ideas that we have, getting them into your body through your hands and onto paper. That's a fundamental, basic thing that everybody should be able to do. Um, and then other things like building something with your hands, right? You should be able to do that as well. So being able to create programs where, that ultimately can break free from an academic schedule, can break free from, you will get this degree within 3 semesters, and can, this is what I mean by social promotion, that, oh, you left this semester, you go on to the next semester, regardless of whether you got an A or a D. If you got a D, you need to keep working on that until you can get all the way up to an A. And again, if you take grades out of it, it's like, get that skill, master that skill, demonstrate that you can master the skill, then you go on to the next thing, get the next skill. Um, but that's just way too pie in the sky for any real institutional structure to adopt right now. But other pieces are adoptable. Things like, the size of our program is small enough and focused enough that everyone can be working on the same things, meaning we may not need separate courses. Like, everybody could just be in the studio learning everything they need to learn across the semester by whoever needs to show up to teach it to them whenever they show up, instead of from 9 to 3 you have this class, and then from 4 to 5 you have this other class, then that's Tuesday, Thursday, and this is Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Like, why? Why? um, I think we can break down a lot of those models, piece by piece, to get to a place where we're truly educating the individual rather than running a certificate mill, right?
Sekou, I love conversations with you because you are just such a dangerous mind, and I love a dangerous mind. But you work a lot, you think a lot. We're very similar in that probably our favorite places to be is inside of our heads. And doing this work, the work, in hip hop architecture and and the systems that you're building beyond, it is just that, right? It is work. It on some level, it can be sacrificial. How do you stay grounded? Like, what is your spiritual practice? What keeps you moving forward in the direction you want to go?
Yeah, well, a lot of my time and energy over the last 12 years has been focused on self-improvement. I have realized a while back this idea was presented to me that we need to be in training. It's like, wow, I actually need to be training myself to understand how to be a better person. Like, it's not just something that just happens, that just comes. And it was a revelatory idea to me that I need to actually learn this thing. I need to be in school for how to be a good person, how to be a human being. And this is an ongoing pursuit. It's not something that you can just take one course or go to one seminar or read one book and have all of it done, right? And I think that's a lot of people's attitudes, that if they have that calling or that awakening that, oh, I need to find something better, then they're looking for that one book, or they're looking for that one guru, or they're looking for that one audio course or seminar that they can take that'll fix everything. And it just doesn't exist. It has to be a dedicated practice of I'm going to train myself. So I've been a member of the Global Information Network for the last 11 years, and going through all the different levels of training that organization provides. And it's, I attribute 100% of my career success to my work in that. I also have a spiritual practice. I have a meditation practice. I listen to audios training every day. I read inspirational books every day. I listen to inspirational leaders on a regular basis, and I go and meet other people who are part of a community of like-minded people, so I can have these relationships that I can depend on, so that when I'm off into my crazy rants about ephemeral bullshit, I don't feel like I'm alone in the world, that other people actually understand what I mean, when I'm talking about quantum physics or the laws of the universe, or altered, alternate dimensions or different civilizations or things like that, right? That's a huge part of who I am and how I define myself and my journey thus far, for sure.
Beautiful. What are three books like just that quickly come to mind? And they could be also like an audio recording or something that you feel is just really shifted, like your consciousness, maybe even ones that you revisit because of that.
Yeah, I have a whole list of them, but I'll tell you that the top three. The book "Ask and It Is Given" by Jerry and Esther Hicks is something that is probably the most powerful book that I've ever read, and I read it over and over again. I travel with it sometimes. Sometimes I just put it in my suitcase just to have it there, because of the power that that book has. The Secret is a really good introductory book for anyone interested in the law of attraction or things of this nature. It's a really simple book, really clear. It got really popular about 10 years ago, then fell out of popularity because a whole bunch of people said it didn't work. But nothing works unless you work it, right? So those two are great places to start. And if you're looking for a really transformational audio course, I said that there isn't one that exists that is answer for everything. But if there is one, this one comes closer than anything else. It's called Your Wish is Your Command. Not your wish is my command. Your wish is your command. And if you can get your hands on a copy of Your Wish is Your Command, it is truly, truly transformational material. And if you have trouble finding it, you can look up yourwishisyourcommand.com. I think some of it still exists on YouTube. It may have been taken down off of YouTube, but it also can be accessed at globalinformationnetwork.com.
Sekou, first of all, that list got me right together. For people, Asking It Is Given by Jerry and Esther Hicks. If anyone is interested in learning a bit more about Esther Hicks, who channels someone called Abraham Hicks, you can just find tons of YouTube. Just Google Abraham Hicks. It will all come up. Secondly, it explains and shows me how and why we connect the way in which we do. Because there is a knowing and a focus that you have that speaks very much to what you're speaking about. But before I ask our last question, where can people find you? Like, where can they connect with you and find out the exciting things that you're working on next?
Yeah. Speaking of Google, I think I'm one of the easiest, most Googleable people.
Light flex, guys. He's like, just Google me. You're fine.
No, it not exactly. It's just because my name is not that common. I think I only found one other Sekou Cooke through Google and two others on Instagram somewhere, but who have like 3 posts. But yeah, I'm pretty active on the gram, on IG, at Sekou21. And my studio is at Sekou Cooke Studio. I'm not as active on Twitter, but my website is sekoucooke.com, SeKouCooke.com. And all the good stuff is on there. We're just in the process of uploading some new written material on there and some really good AV stuff and some profiles and some of the exhibitions that we've done. So, yeah.
Amazing. Well, brother, I want to take this time to just acknowledge you and thank you for, and I've mentioned it before, but like, thank you for existing on the edge of what you think is possible. And the reason I say it like that is because, I know sometimes to step out on an idea that's your own, or one that you feel is not even being spoken about can sometimes make it seem like you're crazy. You're like, am I crazy? Am I delusional? And in a way, it's because it seems so evident to you that you can't believe that other people don't see it as well. And so to step out, do that, and speak your truth, like I have to acknowledge that because it unlocked so many things within me, things that I didn't even know I was asking for. It did, and I know if it did it for me, it will do and continues to do that, for other people, for the work that it took, even through and with the help of your sister. I have a very incredible sister as well, so I understand exactly what it means to have a big sister who sees you. But to, cross that chasm, come here, do the things that you thought you were supposed to do, and transmute that frustration into your own path, right? That is something that requires a level of courage that we all have within us, but yet sometimes forget that we were actually already born with. And so I have to acknowledge and thank you for that. But if you had everything at your behest, what is the world that you imagine for the future?
Thank you. I appreciate all that acknowledgement, and it's really humbling for me to hear all that, especially since I'm just kind of doing things that I think should be done, and saying things that sound right to me. And I actually quite often expect people to think I'm batshit crazy, and people keep thinking, oh, keep saying to me, at least, that sounds like a good idea. So, and thanks for giving me a truly impossible question to end with. I think I am an optimist at heart, and an unending optimist. I am filled with hope for the future. I see as much of the good in all circumstances as I can. I truly believe that things happen for us and not to us. And so I'm seeing whatever challenges come up for us globally, individually, collectively, as opportunities for growth and transformation. And I think we're all ready for massive transformations in different ways that, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, even 2 years ago, we couldn't have imagined, right? But having seen as much as we have seen over the last 2.5 years, I think we are ready for even bigger changes. And I think a lot of those are going to be quite fantastic and exciting and fun. So.
Yeah, absolutely, and big changes are coming.
Yes.
I know you feel that as well. Gird your loins, everybody. Gird your loins. Get prayed up and meditated up, honey. Sekou, again, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure. I mean, when they say iron sharpens iron, these are those moments, and I'm so grateful. So thank you, brother. Have a beautiful, beautiful rest of your afternoon.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks. Take care.
Man, Sekou really shows the power of staying curious and constantly putting yourself in the position to learn. Share some of your thoughts with us over on Instagram and Twitter at Black Imagination. And be sure to check out this conversation and others at blackimagination.com. And you can now watch this episode on our new YouTube channel, the Institute of Black Imagination. Life is a mystery, but some of its greatest truths are hidden in plain sight. Stay curious and keep dreaming.